Hello to all my readers and listeners at Break Free Media. This is Karen Hunt with my first ever Break Free Mondays. Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. I'm now recording this on my phone. Every other time that I practiced recording this on my computer, it worked. And then I did it twice now trying to get it done for you, and it did not work at all. So I'm now on my phone, and I just pray to God that this works. I'm going to take a drink of water because I've been talking now for quite a while. So anyway, very happy to be here with you all this evening, a little later than I anticipated, but it's going to get better. This is my first time. A little bit nervous, but also very excited to share some thoughts with all of you this evening. So there are a million topics that I could have chosen for this first ever conversation with you all, but I figured what better topic than freedom, since I have called my my space on Substack Break Free Media. And I've explained before throughout my life that I have faced many challenges with people, organizations trying to shut me up and trying to take away my freedom, everything from fundamentalist Christian world that I grew up in to a liberal, the liberal communist world to even the Islamic world, which actually threatened my very life. But I have somehow managed to get through it all, and I'm here with you now to speak to you. And it's actually quite a miracle that I'm actually able to do that. Because there was a point in my life when in my first marriage, it was an abusive, I've talked about it before, it was an abusive, physically abusive marriage. And I was told constantly in that marriage how stupid I was, how I really had nothing of value to say, to the point where it got to where I literally could not even speak. I was no longer able to articulate any thoughts or ideas that I had. I had a lot going on in my head. I came to live kind of in this fantasy world inside my brain. I wrote lots of stories. I drew a lot of art, but I was kept very silent. And I do remember it was probably the first Christmas after we were married, so I hadn't quite been silenced completely yet. We were at a party with some friends at their home nearby, and everybody was talking about politics and the world, and a lot of Brits there. I was the only American, and of course they were bashing the United States. And so I said something in defense of my country. Well, on the way home, I was completely blasted for daring to speak up because I knew absolutely nothing about politics. I was an idiot. I was also an American. So what did I know about the world? And I should never, ever, ever again offer any sort of opinion whatsoever. And from that day onwards, I didn't, because I was punished rather severely for daring to speak my mind. So, the fact that I am here right now, speaking to you all now, is quite a miracle. My silence became very complete at that time, to the point where I could not even speak on the phone. It took many, many years before I was actually able to speak on the phone. I mean, I could do it. It caused a great deal of anxiety inside of me, but eventually I was able to speak on the phone again after many years. And now I just have basically a normal aversion to speaking on the phone, like everybody seems to these days. Nobody wants to talk on the phone. We all send each other messages like, is it okay to call you? And then, we'll talk on the phone. Otherwise it's, we don't. But so it's all quite miraculous that I'm here at this point in my life, finally, as a little old lady, being able to speak when all of that time, over and over and over again, people tried to silence me. And over and over again, I refused, and I stood up and I fought against it, and I overcame. And after everything that I went through, finally in Luxor, Egypt, during COVID, which I've been writing about in my book, when I was able to see the world, that was during COVID, I was able to look across the world to the United States, where everyone was in a kind of this mass hysteria. And that wasn't happening. That was the one thing that was actually good about living in Luxor at that time. I was free to do whatever I wanted because life just went on as normal. And that's when I started really looking into the news and trying to do some research and find out what was really going on. Why were we being fed all of this these narratives? And then when I returned to the United States, to Phoenix, I started thinking, I want to write about all this stuff. Again, I could have just, sat back and lived kind of a normal life, like people do, but I had this fire inside of me, this desire to write about all the things that I had learned in my life, all the different places that I lived, particularly from coming back from such an extreme situation in Egypt. So I found Substack, and it was finally the place where I was free to speak without being censored, without anyone telling me to shut up. And that's why I started Break Free Media. And so freedom means so much to me. I started with very few subscribers because, I'd been canceled by everybody at that point before being canceled was even a thing. I had experienced it. And now here I am just talking away, hoping that this time my video will actually work and I'll be able to upload it and you'll all be able to see it and listen to it. So that's freedom to me. Freedom doesn't come easily. It's not just, oh, well, I'm free to do whatever I want and la-di-da. No, freedom takes perseverance. It takes courage. It takes overcoming. It takes fighting, because any time that you stand up for freedom, there's going to be somebody who is going to try and bash you and beat you down. So I've always fought for freedom. And it's sad how far away we have strayed from our freedom in the West and how we really don't appreciate anymore what we actually have. And I think about that. And I was thinking about that today when Tucker Carlson published his interview with Masoud Pezeshkian, the president of the Iranian Islamic regime. And by the time I looked at it, it had already garnered 25 million views. And I suppose by the time I publish this, it will be, many, many more beyond that. But in his introduction to his talk, a couple of days before the interview, he gave an introduction, and he assured his audience that he doesn't actually think that, of course, Pezeshkian is going to lie. He's not really going to always tell the truth, but it's important that we listen to what he has to say. And of course, this is the reason why, there's some people who will never be interviewed by Carlson, people who obviously would find themselves on a very antagonistic platform, like Netanyahu, for example, because he would be considered just a flat out liar. Why would he go there at all? Why would he reduce himself to that level? But somebody like, Putin, somebody like the president of Iran, these types of people. And I've talked about other ones, revisionist historians like Daryl Cooper. These are the type of people that Tucker Carlson is platforming. He wants us to listen to them. Well, the people who are giving us the most tyrannical view of the world. In the meantime, well, he's saying that he is America first. So it's a very twisted, upside down world that we're living in now. Very, very confusing. And I'm writing another piece about that as well, so I'm going to have more about that. But it's very strange because now we have Islam, communism, and the far right all joining forces against the one democracy in the Middle East, the one place where you can speak up freely. And in fact, if Tucker Carlson were to go to Iran and speak out the way he is against that regime, he would be imprisoned, he would be tortured, he would be killed. The same in Russia, the same in all of these places that he is sort of highlighting that we desperately need to listen to their voices. And then he shuts down the voices of an actual democracy. So that's the upside down world that we are living in now. So the thing is that we sometimes we are put in prison, but then often we put ourselves in prisons. And that's another thing that I want to talk about today. We take away our own freedom. And actually, our prisons become very cozy and comfortable, and we don't really want to, we become used to them, and we don't want to venture out of them. And last night, or the night before, I watched, a friend suggested that I watch the film Brazil. I'd watched it years ago, and so I watched it again. And the main character in the film, Sam Lowry, is a very, well, he wants to be a very ordinary guy. He's very happy in his dreary job, surrounded by a sea of other, people in a dreary job, one desk after the other, completely nondescript, doesn't want to stand out at all, doesn't want to be promoted because then a spotlight will be put on him. He's happy in his life, at least he seems so. But then at night he goes home and he dreams. And in his dreams, he is this sort of like God flying with these amazing wings. He's flying free above in the clouds, and there's this beautiful woman who's captured in this in a kind of a cage, and he needs to free her. So he goes through all these adventures in his dreams, freeing this person. And then, lo and behold, in the real world, he sees a woman who looks exactly like the one in his dreams, and he spends the rest of his life pursuing her, trying to save her, going through all of these things that actually draw him to the attention of the authorities. And he has a very wealthy, powerful mother who has always managed to get him out of the scrapes that he gets in, but eventually she's not able to any longer. He is abandoned by everyone. He is captured by these tormentors who put him into a chair with this thing on his head and begin to torture him and get inside of his brain. And just as they're about to, as the mad scientist is about to, enter his brain with this device, suddenly these, the freedom fighters come down, they free him, he gets away, he finds the girl, he saves her, and they go out of the city, into the country, into this beautiful, beautiful green countryside, and everything is absolutely fabulous and wonderful. Well, but then that's not the end of the movie, because you see him again. Actually, he's never left that chair. He's still imprisoned in that chair. His body is imprisoned, but his mind has gone free. And his tormentor is leaning over him and saying, "We've lost him," which is meaning that his mind, they no longer have captured his mind. It's gone somewhere else. And he's lost in his fantasy dream world forever. And it's disturbing that it's a disturbing fact that technology now offers us this same sort of false freedom, this seductive fantasy world that we are supposed to be captured into, because the real world has grown so terrifying and uncertain, especially since COVID. People were encouraged, or in fact mandated, forced to hide inside of their homes, inside of this prison. And the only way out of it they had were these devices, where we were able to go into these devices, and these devices comforted us and entertained us and told us what was going on in the outside world. And we came to trust certain influencers inside those devices who told us things that we wanted to hear, that made us feel better. And then once we were allowed back out into the real world, we took those devices with us, clutching them tightly. We couldn't let go of them. And you see that now with people. Everyone's clutching onto their devices. But the next move, of course, is to install these devices inside of our actual brains. And it's incredible when you think about it, how gladly people lose themselves in these fantasy worlds, and how they don't really understand what's happening to them, and how artificial intelligence is coming to control more and more aspects of our lives. I think eventually it's all going to fall apart, but it's going to cause a lot of it's going to be a terrible, terrible time when that happens. And in the meantime, we have these sort of tech gods who are overgrown boys who are still living in a fantasy world of the video games that they liked as children, and they want to capture us inside of their fantasy worlds, and somehow we're going along with it. And there's one guy in particular I want to mention, Palmer Luckey. He founded Oculus, and he is also now the founder of Anduril, which is a company which is now supplying our military with technology so that they can fight better. And he's, part of Trump's government, which is all on board with all of this surveillance, and along with his good buddy Peter Thiel of Palantir, who wants to survey all of us and gather all of our data, and people are going along with it. So anyway, in a blog post, I kid you not, Lucky, he said this in a blog post a few years ago. He created a game called, and he said in the game, if you die in the game, you die in real life. That was his goal with this game that he created. And he said that it's a death game that could only be escaped through completion. Sort of like Squid Game, right? A game where if players' hit points dropped to 0, their brain would be bombarded by extraordinarily powerful microwaves, supposedly killing the user. Lucky goes on to say that the big problem that always bothered him was how pumped up graphics might make a game look more real, but only the threat of serious consequences can make a game feel real to you and every other person in the game. He then describes how he refined a microwave emitter within the game, hidden so that employees, regulators, and partners didn't know about it, that could be overdriven to a lethal level. Lucky refined it by tying, he explained it, by tying 3 explosive charge modules to a narrowband photosensor so that when the screen flashes red at a specific frequency, a game over screen is displayed and the charges are fired, instantly destroying the brain of the user. Yes, he finished his blog post by saying that as far as he knows, it's the first non-fiction example of a VR device that can actually kill the user, and it won't be the last. Certainly not. So Lucky was likely fired from Oculus in 2016 because of his conservative political views. Well, now that's a plus, right? Because he's being just brought right into the fold with the whole Stargate thing, which I've written about. You can look up that essay if you haven't seen it yet, Stargate, with Larry Ellison, Peter Thiel, all of these people who want to survey us because, and they say it quite prominently, because that's how they are going to get people to behave, by total surveillance. In fact, remember how conservatives cheered when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. became Health Human Services Secretary. Yet, just recently, a couple days ago, he announced that he wants every American wearing a health tracking device within the next 4 years. But nobody bats an eyelash about that. Isn't it weird? If Biden had announced anything like that, the outcry would have been extreme, but now crickets. Do you really want to be aware of your blood pressure and your heartbeat every second of every day? I mean, for me personally, maybe for some people that might be reassuring, but for me, it's just going to make my blood pressure go through the roof. I mean, do you want to be informed if you eat too much sugar? Or do you want your AI agent notifying someone of higher authority if you seem too depressed and maybe they need to put you on some different kind of medication? And if you resist, well, you need to go into some kind of a treatment to get yourself re-educated. Do you want to be aware every time you go over your limit of alcohol for the day? I mean, do you want your poop investigated? What will happen if you dare remove your device? As you all know, my father, Dave Hunt, was a prominent Christian author. I've talked about him many times. And until his death in 2013, he was a renegade, if there ever was one. I don't know if he was alive today. He would absolutely be speaking out in the loudest voice possible. He refused to be owned. He refused to be bought. And he never belonged to any sort of crowd. I learned that from him. He was a brilliant public speaker, something that I certainly could never live up to. But I remember he told many wonderful stories. He was such a great speaker. And I remember one of them in particular about, I believe he was a Navy SEAL, so he was no ordinary guy. And he told my dad how he had been captured by, I believe it was ISIS, and tortured horrifically. And he said, it doesn't matter how strong you are or how, how much resolve or how much, training you've been through. They have ways to break you. They will make you say whatever they want you to say. But, he said, there's one place where you can stay free always, and that's inside your mind. Well, that's not true anymore. Because, of course, even back, then before we had Neuralink and all of that going on, of course, there were psychological methods that they could use to break your mind. But you could resist that. There could be a corner of your mind that you could keep free, because there was nobody actually inside your mind. And that's what they want now, is for AI to live inside of your mind. Why aren't people rising up against this? Why is this just, I don't know, something that seems to be okay with people? Why isn't there a worldwide revolt? Instead, like crazies like Tucker Carlson get 25 million views for interviewing a powerless president puppet of a tyrannical regime, who Carlson says is probably lying, but we need to listen to him anyway. This is madness. It's insanity. This is what captures 25 million, well, it's got to be 30 million people by now. And people just shrug about it. In fact, it seems like people are kind of just resigned to the fact that, well, if somebody is going to, get inside their mind, at least maybe it should be Elon Musk, because, they trust him more than those other crazy guys. But why do we have to have choices between two evils? Why can't we just reject it all and say, forget it? Nobody's getting inside my head like that. I don't want some video game obsessed crazy guy who thinks that he's some kind of a tech god, making me live in his fantasy world. No, I'm going to keep my mind free. All right. So, there's so much for us to appreciate every day in the real world. And no matter what they promise us with all the filters, and I don't have any filters on, this is me right here. It's all a lie. It's all a mirage. It's not the truth. And if we buy into it, we're left empty of our souls. And so many people, think of all the people who came before us who fought for the freedoms that we have. And we do have so many freedoms still. The fact that I'm here being able to do this and not carted off to the gulag, as long as I can do that, I still have freedoms, right? And it's so sad that our children are being told to decry, to deride the heroes of our past. We've got these revisionist historians that are revising history, even making Hitler into some kind of a hero, and just turning everything upside down. And our children have been fed this since the 1960s. So there's an army now of people who have been indoctrinated in this. I've always been inspired by by martyrs like Richard Wurmbrand. I've written about him previously, and I will continue to write about him because these people are being forgotten, and we need to remember them. These are the true heroes. These are the people who know what freedom really means, and we cannot forget about them. And I especially drawn to Richard Wurmbrand because he was a friend of my family, my parents, my father, and I met him personally, and so it's an unforgettable experience for me. He spent, in case you don't know, he spent 14 years in communist prison, tortured, what have you, as a Jewish Christian pastor. And then I found the writings of Father George Calcio, whose book Interviews, Homilies, and Talks I highly recommend. And I read according to a biography of him. Calcio was a medical student in Romania during the communist era, and his open Christian faith made him suspect. He was imprisoned in 1948, where he was subjected to 1984-style mind control experiments, tortured until he denied Christ, and then forced to torture others toward the same end. They wanted our souls, he recalled, not our bodies. Upon his release, he was haunted by his weakness. He continued to preach, however, despite knowing where it would lead. And after months of physical intimidation and death threats, Ceausescu ordered the Securitate, that's Romania's secret police, to make Calciu disappear. Father George's faith was more mature and well-formed by this time as opposed to his previous imprisonment. And despite beatings, torture, and deprivation, he did not break. At one point, he was so exhausted from unremitting interrogation that he could not even recall the Lord's Prayer. Then I remembered that there is a prayer to Jesus Christ. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. And I was no longer scared, he said. I was able to resist. So he spent years in solitary confinement. He knew nothing of his family, and they knew nothing of him. One night, Father George heard the joyful peal of many church bells. It was Easter. Early the next morning, the worst guard in the prison, who delighted in torture, entered the priest's cell. He should have turned his face to the wall. Instead, Father George looked his tormentor boldly in the eyes and proclaimed, "Christ is risen." Rather than delivering a blow, the guard paused and blurted out, "In truth, he is risen," and nervously backed out of the cell. That was when Father George experienced a vision of what Orthodox theology calls the uncreated light, and I do believe that in such extreme circumstances, such visions can certainly occur. And I quote, as he described it, "He shut the door, and I was petrified because of what he had said. And little by little, I saw myself full of light. The board against the wall was shining like the sun. Everything in my cell was full of light. I cannot explain in words the happiness that invaded me then. I can explain nothing. It simply happened. I have no merit." When Father George was put in a cell with two criminals ordered to murder him, he instead converted them to Christ. By this time, Ceausescu was under pressure from Western leaders to not harm the dissenting priest. As a consequence, he was released to house arrest in 1984, and the next year exiled to America, where he spent the rest of his life in freedom. However, just like Rembrandt said once he was released from prison and allowed to come to the United States, how people in the West really don't appreciate their freedom. They don't know how to worship. They don't know the spiritual side of life. They have lost it. They have lost their standard of morals and values. And Father George said the same thing, and I quote him. He said, "I passed my youth under the communist regime in Romania. I was in prison for 21 years, and I don't think that it is easier to be a Christian in America than in Romania under the communist regime. In America, we don't have to suffer imprisonment, torture, and so on. But spiritually, it is very difficult to keep the faith. There are so many temptations on every side that it's a true fight to maintain your faith in Christ." Now, I don't expect everyone. I know that everyone who subscribes, paid subscribers and free subscribers, not everybody believes as I do, and I don't wish for everyone. Well, I mean, I want to have many different types of subscribers. Let me put it that way. And so I'm not always going to, say something about my faith in everything that I speak here. But on this topic of freedom, I think it is important. And I think especially of my Jewish friends who are so fearful now of the way the world is going. And many of them have said that they find themselves returning more to their Jewish faith during this time, because this is how they maintain some kind of strength, some kind of the roots to who they are. It's very, very important. So these martyrs speak so very clearly to the prisons that we create for ourselves, because often that is what we do. I mean, they lived in real prisons, and they were free in their minds, free in their hearts. They could be joyful in these horrible circumstances, while we are here complaining constantly when we have so much freedom all around us. So I want to just end, take a little drink of water, but I want to just end with a story of one of my many escapes from prisons. I've told a little bit of it before, but not to the extent that I'm telling it here, and it's got its funny moments. So I spent Thanksgiving 2015 in the Sahara Desert, invited to a place called Café Tessardmine by its founder, Karen Hadfield, on a writer's fellowship. It was an absolutely beautiful place that she had built in the middle of the Sahara Desert. And again, I could have stayed home, but instead, I spent a month in this living this austere life in the desert, doing a project that I created called My World Project, which was connecting the children in this village, faraway village, who would never otherwise have the opportunity to do this, connecting them with children in the Hupa tribe of Northern California. So it was really a beautiful project. Karen liked the idea of me doing it. She invited me there on this fellowship. I didn't have to pay to be there. There were, I think, 8 other artists, all artists, writers, I don't know. You could be an artist, writer, musician, dancer, that had been invited there on fellowships, but they all had to pay, but I didn't, because I was doing this project for the benefit of the village. So I landed in Marrakesh, and from there was a 21-hour bus ride over the Atlas Mountains to Erfoud. And from there, I seem to recall that it was close, maybe, I don't know, 2 to a 4-hour drive in a Jeep on a very bumpy road to Café Tessard Mine. You can imagine that was a very tiring journey. And it just so happened that this place was on the border of Algeria. Now, that's not something that Karen mentions on the website, but she did tell us when we got there. In fact, there was a hill right adjacent to Café Tessard Mine, and there was the military on top with binoculars and everything, watching everything. So the first thing we were told was, don't walk in that direction. You walk over there, you might just disappear. We'll never see you again. So if you're going to go for a walk, make sure you go in the other direction. And it was all sand, miles upon miles of sand. And it was just quite stark. During the day, it was extremely hot with a lot of flies. And at night, it was freezing cold. And there was no heating and no electricity after dark. There's no internet there. So you just sort of crawled into your bed at 6 o'clock at night, put the covers on, and that was it. That was it for the rest of the night. And it was very, very, I was actually, because I was there on the fellowship and I wasn't paying it, as it ended up, I was treated sort of like a servant. So where the other artists had their own lovely individual bungalows with private bathrooms, I was relegated to this sort of monkish, very small room adjacent to the huge, big gathering area in the main building. And down the hallway was this very dark and dreary bathroom that I had. And then I was expected to get up early every morning to help in the kitchen, to do the dishes morning, noon, and night, and serve meals. And I kind of wasn't very happy about all of that. I mean, I would have been fine to help a little bit, but I felt like I was really taken advantage of when I was very busy also working on this project. And it wasn't what I had understood I would be doing. But in the kitchen, there was, the doors were open. And so birds would fly in and out of there all the time. And I mean, they would poop everywhere, and the food was just left open. And I would, try to shoo them out, but nobody else seemed concerned about that. And so at a certain point, everybody got violently ill. Fortunately, I did not get, for whatever reason, I did not get as ill as the other artists that were there. Karen, I don't think she got sick at all. But all of the artists that were there were violently, violently ill. And there was no, there was no hot water. There was no, you had to, if you wanted to have a wash, you had to go into the kitchen and put a pot on the stove, and then you sort of had to just dump it over yourself. And so for a month, nobody ever really had a real wash or anything like that. And, it became like, I mean, there was nothing really to clean things with. I mean, it turned into kind of a Stephen King horror movie kind of at that point. And I decided I had to get out of there. The minute that I finished my project, I was going to leave. And that would be before I should have left. I stayed there, I think, almost a month, not quite a month, by the time I was able to leave. And there was one other a renegade artist there as well. And we became friends, and she decided she was going to leave with me. So we made our plan, And we insisted, even though the Karen did not want us to leave, but we insisted, we're getting out, we're leaving. And we sort of, insisted that somebody drive us in the Jeep to Air Food. So we did that, and then we took the night bus from there, the 21 hours or however long it was from there to Fez. I came from Marrakesh, and then we went from there to Fez. And that was the craziest journey, I can tell you. But we were so happy to be on that bus. But the driver had OCD. He was obsessed with cleanliness and with bad smells. So the entire time he was muttering to himself about people were smelly and they needed to stop. And he was constantly spraying the air, and everybody started sneezing because he was putting these like really strong scents in the air. And my friend, she's actually Australian Palestinian, so she spoke Arabic. And in fact, we'd had a wonderful time in the village, going and visiting the women and having tea with them and being able to talk to them, and also with the children, with the project that I did. That was all fantastic. But again, we were happy to be out of there and on that bus. So she could understand what he was saying as well as all the other people. I couldn't understand them, but they were all trying not to laugh because it was so funny. And periodically he would stop the bus and march up and down the aisle, spraying this scent everywhere and making us all sneeze more violently. And one time he found this man who was sleeping, who had taken his shoes off. And that is absolutely the worst, that you do not take your shoes off. I found that out on my 21-hour journey to the Sahara Desert, when the first thing I did was get comfortable, take my shoes off. Well, I got yelled at by everybody around me that I was disgusting. You put your shoes back on. The bus driver yelled at me. And of course, I never did that again. So this man had done the absolute worst thing he could by falling asleep with his shoes off. And he was whacked by the driver. And, again, everyone was trying not to laugh because this driver had a lot of power. Here we were in the middle of nowhere on these lonely mountainous roads in the dead of night. And he could stop and just throw anybody off the bus that he wanted to if they made him angry enough. So nobody was going to do that. But I can tell you, eventually we did make it to Fez, and we were so happy. We got off that bus. We made it to our riad, where we were staying inside of the Medina. Fez is an absolutely magical, wonderful city. I had been there as a child, and I was so excited to go back. I've written about some of those adventures, childhood adventures that I'd had there. So I was so excited to go back. And the first thing that we did once we settled into our riad was to wind our way through the Medina and find the absolute most expensive, nicest hotel that we could, and go in there and get one of those famous Moroccan scrubs and baths and massages and saunas, and cleaned all that grime and dust and sand off of our bodies. And then we went up to the rooftop terrace. I've got a picture here for you of that beautiful view, and got ourselves martinis and toasted our freedom. And I can never felt more free than I did in that moment, looking across the beautiful view with the mountains surrounding the city. And at a certain point, I think it was a flock of swallows flew across like some sort of a dance ballet at the same time that the muezzin began the call to prayer. And it was just this absolute magical moment. And we looked at each other just with all this joy and said, wow, just think, if we hadn't made that decision to leave, we would be back there wallowing in misery. But here we are having this wonderful, wonderful time. We made the right choice. And so that's just a little example of, always making that choice to break out of the prison, be free, and, again, have some incredible, incredible adventures. Now, the sad part of it is that my friend and I, we went through this experience together, and we were friends, and we remained friends for years after that. But then what happened? October 7th, and the world changed, and I lost many friends at that point because I took a stand for Israel. And of course, my friend from the Sahara was a Palestinian. That was her background. And she had other beliefs than I did. And I looked recently, and I don't think we are connected anymore on social media. I mean, I could be wrong about that, but I kind of think that she has cut me off. I hope she hasn't. But, again, nothing was really ever the same after October 7th. And this is what happened. So again, I mean, we have all of these incredible experiences in our lives. And I think of, all the times that I resisted the prisons that people and organizations and circumstances tried to put me in. And I will never stop living this way. And sometimes, like Sam Lowry from Brazil, we build our own prisons. We like our prisons. We feel comfortable inside of them. But in the end, this is a deception, because what did he do? In his dreams, he flew free. And those dreams got him into a lot of trouble in the real world. And I've been in a few scraps myself. But once you've experienced that real freedom in the real world, the freedom that you have to fight for, that you have to stand up for, that takes courage, that takes perseverance, that's not easy, you never ever really want to give it up. And that's why I put C.S. Lewis's quote here, and I'm putting it at the very end of this talk. And it might not have seemed like the most obvious quote for a topic of freedom, but it really is. And I quote him here. If we are all going to be destroyed by an atomic bomb, let that bomb, when it comes, find us doing sensible and human things. Praying, working, teaching, reading, listening to music, bathing the children, playing tennis, chatting to our friends over a pint and a game of darts. Not huddled like frightened sheep and thinking about bombs. They may break our bodies. A microbe can do that, but they need not dominate our minds. And that's what, more than ever in history of this world, they are trying to do now, is to dominate our minds. Yes, they can bomb us to high heaven, but don't let them find us living in fear. Don't let them find us trying to escape into a machine. Don't let them find us attached to machines that deny reality because we are so afraid of the fear that engulfs us. Let us be living real lives as real people do. Okay, that concludes my talk. I do pray that this time I'm able to upload it properly so that you're all able to see it. I will get better at this as time goes on. Perseverance, right? Determination. Yes, that's what I have here. So God bless you all. Have a lovely, lovely week. And I look forward to reading your comments and all of that. Thank you so much.